Hello, everyone, and welcome to reality. I'm Lev, and I'm here with William today.
Hi, everyone.
Today, we want to talk about urban farming, which might sound a little boring, but there's a lot of technology involved here, actually, which should be very interesting. We want to talk about the company in particular, Square Roots, which is an urban farming company founded by somebody named Tobias Peggs and Elon Musk's brother, Kimball Musk. And they've created a company where they have these shipping containers that they've converted to farms as electricity is hooked up to these farms. And they use ultraviolet light to grow crops inside the containers. It's essentially hydroponic farming, but with these containers. And they're integrated with technology like apps and things like that. What they hope is to make food growing more accessible to different areas in urban communities and to make it so you don't need to ship food as often because everything could be self-sufficient within the containers. And there's other companies like this, but this is one of the more well-known ones, and they're based in Brooklyn. Anything else to add, William?
The first time I heard about such a thing was probably in relation to the illegal marijuana industry, actually. In California, there's a lot of illegal marijuana farms, and sometimes they're in what's called grow houses out in the desert. These are controlled environments inside houses specifically designed for growing marijuana. And you'd hear about the government raiding these operations and taking all the crops out. So that's kind of like the first time I heard about it. But thinking about it more, there's a whole history of controlled climate farming, which probably starts with greenhouses.
Yeah.
I haven't really thought of it too much, but if you just think of a greenhouse, that's a controlled environment for growing crops that need, particular amounts of sunlight and warmth all year round. And then that kind of transitioned into these grow houses. And now we have these shipping containers, which are very high tech, plugged into the internet. They've got water usage down to a science where they recycle all the water. Some of these containers that are growing crops like lettuce or herbs, they use about the amount of water you use to take a shower in one day. So they about 8 gallons, 8 or 10 gallons a day is all they need to grow their crops in these containers. So it's a very high tech, efficient use of water and space. So I'm curious about the future of such an endeavor and looking forward to discussing the details.
I think a lot of what goes on, at least with the people who develop these things, they often talk about like wanting to feed everyone and making good food for everyone and all these high standing altruistic statements, but really I think is mostly rooted on wanting better quality food anyway. That I mean, you serve a demand here when you create something like food that can be accessible anywhere. Everybody wants food of some kind and for it to taste good. So when you have both, it's meeting a demand that really does fulfill a need, both nutritionally and just pleasure in life. You could satisfy both needs. I think that's something very worthwhile. We don't need to add all these other strange justifications just to make it seem like we're doing something good. But I think there's really a practical reason for doing all this, despite what they say in public. But there's a lot of benefit here. I mean, one of the reasons these two guys started the company was that freezing food often reduces its flavor. So if you ship something from California all the way to New York and you just freeze it, you're going to lose flavor and quality of the food itself. I mean, freezing has improved over the years, but it still has some effect on the quality of the food. And by growing locally, you don't need to freeze anything anymore. You would just sell it at a farmer's market or just wherever you locally grow it. You wouldn't need to worry about shipping. That also reduces costs for the producer and the farmer. And you could even make it so that people can start a farm more easily. You don't need to buy huge amounts of land. You just buy one shipping container to start, which some people have done. And even Square Roots provides training in training the farmers to use their products. So there really is a practical end to all this. It's not just some ecological desire, but there's really good reasons to pursue this, whoever you are, either quality of food or, I mean, a good market to sell food or all sorts of ideas.
Yeah, I think that one of the most beneficial aspects of it is the quality of the food is better because it's fresher. It might take a couple days to ship something from, like a head of lettuce from California to New York in the wintertime. So, that's going to take a toll on the freshness and quality of the produce. So it does cater to the fresh produce industry and people who are really looking for, taste, quality, tasty food. So that's one definite benefit. I do think that it's in the long run, it's very important though to recognize that this is a potential solution to the space problem. It takes a lot of space to grow lettuce in an open field, and there's a lot of damage to insects and damage in transit when you're transporting these products across the country. So this urban farming idea kind of takes that out of the equation, and you don't have that waste anymore, and so it's more efficient way of producing food. The drawback though is that it costs a lot in electricity because a controlled environment requires energy. So 50% of their cost in these containers is electric usage. So they have to solve that problem because right now they can only afford to produce light produce like herbs and lettuce and cabbage. They need to figure out how to lower the cost of energy.
Yeah, that's probably the hardest thing because really it only works because of electricity, really, if you think about it. That the UV light that they use, I mean, that's the most essential thing to a plant, sunlight or energy from light. Without that, there's nothing. There's no point to it. So really it's only the electricity. So really that's a secondary issue in the sense that, well, in any business, I think there's something more foundational. It's that business that affects the development of it, that the development of electricity will make a huge impact on many industries. But even still, developing urban farming is a good solution to the space problem of growing populations. I mean, you could just stack them. I mean, that's already almost twice as much space given than when you're just growing on flat ground. If you only one level, I mean, I think it's so much more efficient to have that space, and even more, you don't need as much equipment because by being connected to a container like that, it's just, you can make it run automatically even. There isn't as much hands-on maintenance. You could add robotics to that to improve it. But when you have things like lettuce and all that, you can almost automate it, make even more efficient food production.
And at a kind of philosophical level, it's really another way to command nature. It's like mankind showing that it can harvest crops in a city where there's like no field, and it's kind of the epitome of controlling nature and molding it to human need. So it's very philosophical in its approach or orientation in that regard as well, and I kind of like that. you have anything to add on that
I
aspect?
think that's really maybe the most interesting thing about this to me, that it expresses something more fundamental than just growing some crops, but growing food, and food is maybe the most fundamental thing to human development. Like some believe that the development of fire is the reason humans evolved to reach their cognitive capacity. Like the first fires were not made by the human species. I think Homo habilis, and then Homo sapiens continue that, of course. But by being able to use fire, you can cook food and get more nutrients, and that enables more um, distribution of energy, including into the brain and all that. So that can contribute to human evolution and the agricultural revolution, expand civilizations, and even development in food, prevent starvation, and you can feed thousands more people than you could otherwise. So it really is the history of innovation, starting from the beginning of time or beginning of human history, even before human history. And yeah, it's more fundamental than maybe anything else, any other values people pursue. So, unlike what people say about, some people say that capitalism destroys the earth or just causes destruction. I think this is counter evidence for that fact. That by through competition and fulfilling desires and of like say quality of food and food products, you can actually provide something that is creative, that creates things, that makes life better, even your natural environment better by saving energy and all that. I mean, it's counter evidence to those anti-capitalists.
Yeah, it's kind of an example of how competition drives innovation, because in this situation, you have people in certain climates, like square roots, they operate in colder climates in New York and Michigan. So they have to deal with not being able to grow crops outside during the winter time. And this solves that problem. And then it allows them to compete with companies that ship their produce from California or the West. So it shows that when you allow freedom of trade and markets, then you get people like Kimball Musk and Tobias Peggs figuring these things out, how to compete with these outdoor farms. And I think that's just a great idea. And it's, there's several of these indoor farming companies, coming up now and entering the market. And their products right now are limited, and they cost more than regular, traditional farms. But I think that's just because they're at the initial stages of this industry, and they'll figure out the problems, and then maybe they'll get some politicians to promote more like cost effective energies like nuclear or coal. Maybe we'll start up coal again. So I don't know how it's going to play out, but somehow we've got to solve the energy problem in order to solve the food production problem.
Yeah, they're very much connected. I mean, I'm a big fan of nuclear in particular. We should do a discussion about that sometime. There's so much regulation about that that could have solved so many problems if we only had it, nuclear energy. But do you
Another,
think that square roots is going to make it that far? Or I'll phrase it this way: do you think that square roots will be the innovator? Do you think somebody else is just going to take these ideas and build on them and actually be the real innovator of this? Like this seems like just a start, but I'm not sure if square roots is really the innovator yet.
I don't think Kimball Musk is the innovator. If anything, it's his partner, Tobias Peggs, who's possibly innovating in the machine learning area of it. because what they do is they purchase their containers from a company called Freight Farms.
Mhm.
So they didn't create the container machines, but uh, maybe they're innovating in terms of scaling this so that
Sure.
it's profitable, figuring out how to connect all of the machines, and they're also innovating in like training people how to do, they call them the next gen farmers. So they're training next gen farmers to manage these container farms. So they might be innovating in terms of the business practices of it. So I think that there's potential there. Yeah, I think there are some hiccups. I mean, they in 2020, Kimball Musk was talking about a super farm where he would have 25 containers. Right now, they just have two locations with, I think, 10 containers each. But he was talking about a super farm, and that never happened as far as I can tell. It was supposed to happen in 2020, but I don't think they got it off the ground. So it's a question of how quickly can they expand, and what is the demand for their product, because their product does cost more. So it's
Yeah.
a question of cost, really.
Yeah, there might be better ways to implement it than the container. Like, I don't think they really solved, I'll put it this way, I don't think they solved urban farming yet. There's still many issues left to solve and figure out. It does sound like they've done a lot with machine learning and, say, maintaining the environment of inside, but it's different to where how you place the farms, or what you use to place inside, and whichever materials you used. That seems to be what needs development the most, because that's what I've found all this information on. Like, is there anything used besides these containers? How else can we implement, say, modular things like this, almost as if it's furniture? Can you reduce the size even? Is electricity really truly necessary to the way it functions? Or to what extent is it necessary? Or in what way could we just make it like, imagine no electricity, just almost make it like an irrigation system of some kind with recycled water? I don't know. These are just random ideas I'm having.
Yeah, they did work on the irrigation system. I think that's pretty innovative, where they recycle the water. So essentially,
Yes.
they don't waste any water.
Yeah.
Another way I can think of is they're working on the labor problem. Like it still costs a lot of money in labor. I think they've got it down to a part-time job where people work like 20 hours a week uh, to manage one of these containers. But if they were to automate it and more, so that they didn't have to pay so much in labor, then that could be a cost saving solution.
Yeah.
But these are all things that they're aware of and working on. In terms of the container, that might not be the best solution, because maybe there could be a solution where they combine some sunlight with electricity, because when they're in the container, they have no sunlight and they have to rely completely on electricity. But if they were to have some sort of ceiling that could open and close, then they could, and I think some of the indoor farming companies do this already. It's more like a greenhouse type thing, where they have a ceiling and sunlight can come in when it is sunny, so that you can get natural UV.
Also, as far as some of the issue of shipping food for the quality of taste, especially, and we can think of there are other ways besides just reducing distance travel. We can improve, say, freezing methods, because when you freeze it, well, you don't need to worry about the distance. You just, no distance is too much. Like, the cost of electricity in, say, urban farming goes instead into the cost of shipping, which, so on balance probably be similar, but it doesn't have to be like on location farming. I mean, you can improve freezing in a way that you don't lose flavor, but that too requires a lot of technology development. So it's not like it's just making a lazy solution. It's just a different kind chemically. You can analyze how things freeze and maybe even change the way the chemical structure of the vegetables themselves to prevent like water crystals from causing damage, or even like cryogenics. I mean, if you could ideally preserve human heart indefinitely, you can preserve food indefinitely, which would also mean preserving flavor indefinitely. And flavor, of course, produces more incentive to eat healthier things. So there's good reason to preserve flavor even through freezing, and even already frozen peas don't lose much flavor, but that's just the way they are. It's just the way frozen peas act. So if we could do the same thing with any fruit, that would be amazing. You wouldn't need to worry so much about all these other technology issues as far as the containers and how to grow it.
I don't know much about freezing technology, so I have nothing really to say about that. But I'm sure, some smart scientists could come up with something.
Yeah.
There's got to be ways to innovate in that area. Yeah, frozen peas. I'm not a big fan of peas, but they do seem to take to freezing fairly well. But I notice a difference in flavor when,
Yeah.
between frozen peas and fresh ones. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably always going to be an issue. If you freeze something, it's not, and you freeze it for months, let's say, you're going to lose some quality. It's not going to taste
Yeah.
the same.
You even lose flavor. Like if you go to a garden, pick it and wait an hour even before you use it, even that you'll lose flavor even then. So it's almost impossible to never lose flavor.
Yeah, it seems like refrigeration is just the best we can do, right? It's you
Seems
just
so.
try to keep the water from evaporating, and that's the best you can do.
For the most part.
But that is an important problem to solve. I don't know what can be done. There may be some rehydration thing, technology can be figured out. But I guess the produce itself will consume the water in order to sustain its structure, right? I don't really know the chemistry of it.
I'm not sure it can actively sustain something. It's just you're just waiting for it not to decay. And basically, you pick it. I guess you would say it's dead since it's no longer connected to the plant. So it's just waiting for it to die. So it's
Yeah,
just a matter of slowing it.
it's just decaying and dehydrating, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess that's one of the main problems with growing larger fruit. Like they don't grow watermelon in these containers. It's because that requires a lot of water and a lot of sunlight. I guess that's also an issue with transportation. Is how do you keep watermelon fresh? Over long stretches of transporting it. Can you freeze watermelon? I don't know.
It wouldn't be so good, especially because how much water is in it. The best watermelon I ever had is always grown local. Like any vegetable is miles ahead better when I get it local. Like I would think I don't like certain vegetables if I get them from the supermarket, but if I get them from farmers, but it's like millions of times better tasting and even more incentive to eat well because it just tastes so much better.
Yeah, I can't say I'm too familiar with frozen fruits or vegetables, because in California we have very mild climate all year round, and the Central Valley area has lots of produce.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm spoiled in that regard, because I'm always getting pretty fresh produce at the market.
Yeah.
We do have to import, I think, bananas, but that's that's one of the few things.
Yeah.
Most of the herbs and green stuff is fresh from California.
Yeah.
And even in Los Angeles, the suburbs have farms, so it's I can go down the street and get strawberries, and I live in a suburb of LA, so it's kind of I'm kind of
Well,
spoiled.
I could imagine living in the middle of the city. That'd be especially hard. So I could especially see the value of this urban farming because we can get that quality even if not as advanced even Doesn't have to be that super fancy kind. But even if you just have a place to grow in the city, that's already a huge step.
Is there anything else you wanted to discuss about urban farming?
Not about urban farming, but there's always so much more to say about food. I do want to talk about GMOs sometime and how they're so great, actually. I love GMO.
Yeah, I'd like to do a series on farms like we did a series on the UFOs.
But yeah,
I'd also like to discuss sustainable farms because near LA we have Apricot Lane Farms, which was the basis for the movie Biggest Little Farm. So I think that's also an interesting concept because that's outdoors and they're trying to create this what they call a biodynamic farm where you try to make the farm self-sustaining and use as little outside resources as possible. I guess one other small aspect of indoor farming is the ability to track the product. So one issue that if you go to the website of Square Roots, they make an issue out of transparency. So they have a QR code on every product they sell, and you can scan that code and track its development from seed to the shelf in your local store. That's kind of interesting.
it's intense.
Yeah, so it's just about data, right? They can, if you control your climate and you control the process, you can just track everything.
Yeah.
You can probably figure out, like how many days it took to grow, and you can find out all this information, and that will spread knowledge about farming and get people more interested in the food. That's another aspect that they brought up is they want to unite people with their local food. So they see that as a kind of like a cultural thing. So where if you are aware of where your food comes from and you have this local food community, that creates a culture around food.
I think it works usually. It's slow, but people love food. That's one thing it's easy to find.
Yeah, and when we get better quality food, it'll be a better culture.
So thanks everyone for listening. We'll have more to say on food in the future, but this is a really interesting topic. Goodbye, everyone.